A warship engineered to survive anything, 251 meters of armor, artillery, and legend, was hunted to extinction in 1941. Then she vanished beneath 15,000 feet of Atlantic blackness. Official history claims the British sank her with overwhelming firepower. Survivor whispers insist the crew sank their own ship. Now drone footage from the abyss reveals evidence no historian could access until now. What did the cameras expose on Bismarck's steel corpse that rewrites the end of World War II's most feared battleship? And why does the truth look so much more terrifying than the myth? Construction began in the summer of 1936, when workers at the Blohm and Voss shipyard in Hamburg laid down the first steel plates for what would become the largest battleship Germany had ever attempted. The project was known as Yard Number 509, and over the next 2.5 years, the shipyard's cranes lifted prefabricated sections into place, assembling a hull that stretched 251 meters, longer than 2 football fields. By February 14, 1939, Bismarck was ready for her launch. The ceremony drew top Nazi officials and was broadcast across the Reich, a spectacle meant to showcase the technological power of the regime. As the hull slid into the River Elbe, the scale became unmistakable. 50,000 tons of steel, designed to withstand the heaviest blows any Navy could deliver. The fitting out phase began immediately, with teams installing 8 38-centimeter guns, each capable of firing shells weighing as much as a Volkswagen. The ship's power plant, armor belts, and electronic systems took another 18 months to complete. Every detail reflected lessons learned from the last war: thick, sloped armor for deflecting shells, a labyrinth of watertight compartments, and a propulsion system built for speed as well as endurance. On August 24, 1940, Bismarck was formally commissioned into the Kriegsmarine. She was now the flagship of Germany's navy, a floating fortress that promised both awe and fear. Her presence alone would challenge the balance of power at sea, and every rivet, every gun was a statement of intent from a nation preparing for conflict. Bismarck's imposing silhouette on the water masked a far more complex reality beneath its steel skin. At the heart of her defensive design stood the concept of the inner citadel, a heavily armored box within the hull built to shield the ship's most vital machinery and ammunition stores from even the fiercest attack. German naval architects, drawing on the harsh lessons of World War I, developed the turtleback armor scheme. This approach layered thick, sloped steel plates over the citadel, curving downward at the edges like a turtle shell. The idea was simple. Incoming shells and torpedoes would strike at an angle, glancing off or losing much of their force before reaching the ship's core. The main armor belt running along the waterline measured up to 320 millimeters thick, over a foot of hardened steel. But the real genius lay in how the armor was distributed. Rather than wrapping the entire ship in heavy plating, designers concentrated protection around the engine rooms, magazines, and steering gear. The outer hull could be battered and burned, but as long as the citadel held, Bismarck could keep fighting. Watertight compartments and reinforced bulkheads added layers of security, forcing any breach to fight its way through multiple barriers. This philosophy shaped every decision, from the thickness of the deck armor to the placement of torpedo bulkheads deep within the ship. The result was a fortress afloat, engineered to survive the kind of close-range slugfests that define naval warfare in the Atlantic. Later, when underwater drones swept their lights across the wreck, this hidden architecture became the focal point of forensic scrutiny, offering silent testimony to the logic and the limits of Bismarck's armored heart. Late in the afternoon of May 26, 1941, the North Atlantic sky hung low and gray as the British carrier Ark Royal launched a wave of swordfish biplanes. These slow, fabric-covered planes seemed relics even then, but their crews pressed in against a wall of anti-aircraft fire. The Bismarck, running for occupied France, zigzagged through heavy seas, still defiant after the Denmark Strait. But the swordfish pilots, flying barely above the wave tops, lined up for one last attack. Lieutenant John Moffat's torpedo, dropped at close range, struck home near the stern. The blast jammed Bismarck's rudder hard to port, locked at 12 degrees. Suddenly, the ship could no longer steer a straight course. She began to describe a wide, helpless circle, her escape route cut off. Inside the armored citadel, engineers scrambled to regain control. They tried switching to the emergency steering motors, then attempted to free the rudder by hand. Nothing worked. The ship's massive propellers could only nudge her in a slow arc, never enough to break free. Radio signals crackled, steering failure confirmed. On the bridge, Captain Lindemann and Admiral Lutyens understood at once. Bismarck's fate was sealed. The Royal Navy, closing in from every direction, now had a fixed target. With the rudder jammed, Bismarck was no longer the hunter. She was the prey. Dawn broke over the North Atlantic as the British fleet closed in on its wounded prey. HMS Rodney and HMS King George V took up firing positions, their 16-inch and 14-inch guns trained on the Bismarck at ranges as close as 3,000 yards, point blank for ships of this size. The order rang out, and the first salvos thundered across the waves. Shells the size of small cars crashed into the German battleship, tearing through the superstructure, smashing fire control towers, and igniting fuel and ammunition. Gun crews on HMS Rodney and HMS King George V worked at a relentless pace, loading and firing as fast as their machinery would allow. In less than 2 hours, the British poured over 2,800 shells at the Bismarck. Of these, around 400 hit their target, most slamming into the upper decks and bridge, turning the command center into a twisted ruin. Despite this hurricane of steel, the Bismarck refused to go under. Fires raged from bow to stern. The main guns fell silent one by one as turrets were knocked out or buried under wreckage. Yet the ship's armored heart, the inner citadel, held firm. British officers watched in disbelief as their shells detonated against the thick belt armor, sending up clouds of rust and paint, but leaving the hull's vital areas untouched. Torpedo bombers from HMS Dorsetshire joined the assault, striking the already crippled vessel at close range. Still, the Bismarck floated, battered but unbroken, her survival defying the logic of naval warfare. The gunnery crews, exhausted and grim, kept firing until they ran out of high-explosive shells. What was supposed to be a swift execution had become a drawn-out spectacle, a ship refusing to die even as the sea and sky closed in around her. 50 years after the Bismarck vanished beneath the Atlantic, a new kind of expedition set out. Not with guns or torpedoes, but with the quiet precision of deep-sea technology. In 1989, Dr. Robert Ballard led a team into the cold, lightless depths, searching for a wreck that had become legend. The ship's final resting place lay nearly 3 miles down, on the edge of an extinct underwater volcano, far beyond the reach of sunlight or ordinary divers. Ballard's towed camera platform, Argo, swept slowly over the seabed, sending back grainy images that flickered with the promise of discovery. Then, unmistakable lines of steel appeared out of the darkness, a massive hull, upright, resting on the ocean floor as if still at anchor. The first wide-area survey revealed a scene both haunting and strangely ordered. The Bismarck did not lie broken in pieces, but stood upright, bow raised slightly as if straining against the current. Her main turrets, each weighing over 2,000 tons, were gone, torn free by the violence of the descent and the sudden inversion as the ship capsized. In their place, gaping black holes stared up from the deck, ringed by twisted metal and scattered debris. The ship's superstructure was flattened, stripped away by the pounding it took in her final hours and the immense pressure of the sea. Yet the hull itself, from the armor belt down, remained astonishingly intact. The streamlined form, so carefully engineered in Hamburg, had survived the journey to the bottom almost untouched. Argo's cameras traced the path of destruction across the seabed. The Bismarck had not come to rest gently. Instead, she struck the slope of the underwater volcano and slid nearly a mile before coming to a halt. The slide carved a long scar into the silt, scattering wreckage, gun mounts, rangefinders, and fragments of the bridge across the slope. The stern section had sheared away, trailing a line of debris that mapped the ship's final, desperate tumble. The pattern of the wreck matched the violence of her end, impact, rotation, and the immense forces of a 50,000-ton ship plunging to the abyssal plain. Ballard's survey did more than locate the Bismarck. It set the physical scene for a forensic investigation. The preservation was extraordinary. At this depth, where wood-eating organisms cannot survive, even the teak decking clung to the steel frames. Faded paint, barely visible through the silt, hinted at the camouflage patterns applied in wartime. The absence of the main turrets and the clean lines of the hull offered clues about the mechanics of the sinking, how the ship capsized, how the massive gun housings tore free, and how the hull withstood both the fury of battle and the crushing descent. For the first time, the Bismarck story could be read directly from the wreck itself, not just from survivor accounts or wartime reports. The Argo footage became the foundation for all later investigations. It captured the scale of the ship's final slide, the remarkable upright posture, and the way the wreck's features aligned with the events described in battle logs and survivor testimony. The Bismarck, once the terror of the Atlantic, now rested in cold silence, her secrets preserved by darkness, pressure, and the unbroken armor that had made her famous. This was not just a grave, it was a crime scene, waiting for the next generation of explorers to examine every scar and fracture in the search for answers. Cameron's team arrived at the wreck site with a new kind of tool, remotely operated vehicles small enough to slip through shattered openings and powerful enough to light up the interior darkness. The remotely operated vehicles, named Elwood and Jake, carried high-definition cameras and arrays of sensors. They glided along the hull and through the gaping turret wells left by the fallen guns. As they moved past collapsed bulkheads and the twisted maze of steel, the footage brought the forensic details into sharp focus. Those details would settle a question debated for decades. The armor belt running along the waterline showed only scars and dents where British shells had exploded or glanced off. Even after the storm of battle, the inner citadel, Bismarck's last redoubt, remained unbreached. The remotely operated vehicles traced the torpedo bulkheads as their cameras searched for the telltale signs of catastrophic flooding. Instead, they found the bulkheads largely intact, with no evidence of the massive inward ruptures that would have resulted from external torpedo explosions. British firepower had devastated the superstructure, but the vital core of the ship had survived the onslaught. What the remotely operated vehicles did find was even more telling. Along several sections of the lower hull, the cameras captured metal plates bent outward, not inward. This subtle but crucial detail, confirmed by photogrammetry and frame-by-frame analysis, pointed to an internal force, an explosion or pressure from within the ship itself. Naval engineers and demolition experts reviewing the footage agreed. The direction and pattern of the bends matched what would be expected from scuttling charges, not enemy torpedoes. Survivor testimony recorded in the days after the sinking described the order given in the engineering spaces to open the sea valves and blow the charges. The physical evidence now matched those words. The remotely operated vehicles pressed deeper, threading through the remains of machinery spaces and along the armored deck. In the silence, the cameras found no sign of a catastrophic implosion or the kind of hull breach that would have let water pour in uncontrollably from outside. Instead, the controlled nature of the damage supported the account of a crew determined to deny their enemies the final victory. Even the faint outline of the swastika, still visible beneath layers of silt on the forecastle deck, stood as a stark reminder of the ship's origins and the regime it served, a symbol now frozen in the deep, preserved by the cold and the dark. Engineers on Cameron's team reviewing the footage and the 3D models pointed to the consistency between the outward bent plates and the locations where German demolition teams were known to have placed their charges. The torpedo bulkheads, armor belts, and watertight compartments had done their job, holding out against everything the British could throw at them. In the end, it was the crew's own hand that sent the Bismarck to the bottom. The forensic chain was complete. Survivor testimony, battle records, and the silent testimony of the steel itself all converged on the same verdict. What began as a hunt for a monster ended in a final act of defiance, sealed in the cold silence of the Atlantic abyss. More than 2,000 men served aboard the Bismarck. When the ship slipped beneath the Atlantic, almost all of them went with her. Only 115 survived, pulled from the oil-slick water by British sailors working against the clock. The rescue effort was brief and frantic. HMS Dorsetshire and HMS Maury managed to haul a handful of exhausted, wounded men to safety before a U-boat warning forced them to abandon the rest. The decision was written in the logs, a periscope sighting and a sudden order to depart. Hundreds of voices were left calling out as the ship steamed away, the sea swallowing any chance of further rescue. The loss was staggering. A crew erased in a single morning, leaving families and nations to mourn men whose names would never be recovered from the cold, deep water. Deep beneath the Atlantic, the Bismarck rests as a war grave, its final status anchored not just in history, but in law and custom. Germany recognizes the site as a military grave, protected under its War Graves Act, forbidding any disturbance by German citizens or vessels. While the wreck lies in international waters, beyond the reach of direct enforcement, major expeditions, from Ballard's discovery to Cameron's forensic dives, have honored this by strict non-disturbance. No artifacts have been removed, and entry into areas where remains may rest has been avoided. There is no formal treaty between the UK and Germany. Both nations observe a mutual understanding. The site is to be respected as the final resting place for over 2,000 men. For the wider world, the Bismarck's fate stands as both a technical verdict and a solemn reminder. The wreck is preserved not just by the cold and the deep, but by a collective conscience that sees it as a monument to the cost of war. 70 years on, the Bismarck's armored silence beneath 4 kilometers of Atlantic water still provokes debate, proof that even the deepest wrecks shape our understanding of war, memory, and truth. As technology uncovers new evidence, history refuses to stay buried. The ocean preserves not just steel, but questions no shell can silence. What else lies undiscovered, waiting to rewrite what we think we know? Share your thoughts below.